Is a collision between the United States of America and the European Union inevitable? That's why the conflict is escalating. Ladies and gentlemen, I've heard from our socialist brothers that in just 1 year, the United States of America has supposedly turned into a fascist state, that we have less freedom now, that we have less of everything. Is that what they're telling us? People in masks break into any homes, and drag people out, and they deport citizens of the United States of America from the country. That is, they deport citizens of the United States of America from the country. Fathers of families, well, sometimes there are no families. There's only a second father, but that doesn't matter. Still fathers of families. On the way, shooting them in the face with pistols, so... Well, you understand what a terrible America it is now, how awful it has become to live there, and it's all Trump's fault. We never get tired of victories, as always. I worried along with them, well, with my brothers and sisters, and then I went to check the numbers. I think numbers and facts because, well, without them, everything is just like air vibrations, like they say in America. Hot air coming out of your mouth, but it doesn't mean anything. So the country has become terrible, a terrible country. And the first thing that happens when a country becomes terrible is that people start fleeing from it. That is, from a terrible country, when things are bad, people run away from there, not to there, but away from there. Yes, I see. That's a good way to check from my perspective. According to federal estimates, about 5.5 million United States citizens live permanently abroad, and every year people leave for various reasons. Well, you know, living in Mexico on an American pension is more comfortable than living in America. And about 200,000 in 2025. When things kept getting worse, there was such a place and thing. The company is called Brookings, and it's a public opinion poll. They said that 10,000 more people left, but at the same time, another company just like this one said that fewer people left than usual. Well, in other words, there really wasn't any noticeable exodus. Okay, at the same time, the administration, our Trump administration, forcibly evicted us. So, about 500,000 people and another 1.5 million left. Some say maybe even 2 million left. I don't know exactly who. They don't want to leave, but what can you do? The conditions they created force people to flee. And we know millions, well, just open the gates and they'll rush to the United States, but from the United States, which is supposedly bad, terrible. Yeah, no one wants to leave. That is, for us, from the point of view of an average person, he doesn't understand anything. The average person only thinks about himself, only about himself. But from his point of view, things haven't gotten worse for him. Once again, if things had gotten worse, the situation would be exactly the opposite. People would be running away from here, not to here. We'll discuss this and then we'll talk. By the way, there's also a very, very important point about Minnesota. Of course, they can drive you crazy, absolutely insane, those Minnesotans. It feels like we're in Yemen or maybe Uganda. Actually, Uganda is much better than Minnesota. In 4 years under Biden, people were brought into the United States and lost track of. I'm not joking right now. 300,000 children without parents is no laughing matter, of course. But I'm laughing not because it's funny, but because I feel good. I deserve it all. In my country, they brought in and lost 300,000 children. They were used, as we now know. How do we know? Because some of them were found being used for slave labor on farms, as sex slaves, both boys and girls, in brothels, and as servants, where the children received no payment at all. And the owners, so-called owners, rented them out and made quite a lot of money from it. It cost 20 kopecks for one, but a ruble and 20 kopecks for 6. There was even an old joke about it. In a year under Trump, 60,000 of these children were found. Some were taken home to their parents who were found. Some were placed in orphanages, and some were found foster families. At the same time, the government pays for their care and maintenance. and maybe even for our children too. Let's think about children, understanding that taking their first steps in life is very difficult for them. If you don't have help from your parents, from society, from some charitable organization, basically, when there's no funding or support, it's hard. Trump organized so-called tax-free bank accounts for this purpose. For whom? For 25 million children, so 25 million children will get money? Let me explain what this money is. Trump convinced several billionaires, mainly Michael Dell. I think only Michael gave $6.2 billion. For what? For a $1,000 deposit into each account, with other billionaires also contributing. Now, for each of these accounts, an account is initially opened for a person. He's 1 year and 8 months old there, just born. It doesn't matter right now. If he's at a certain age, I can't remember which age right now, there's a limit. There are 25 million a boom. $1,000 goes into this account, but that's not all. First of all, any donations can be added. These are tax-free, meaning parents, relatives, friends, or just someone, like the father, working somewhere, can deduct them from taxes. And so the employer decided to give a gift, writing it off on taxes. Naturally, he also put a little more money in for the child until the child turns 18. Money goes there, and gifts, as I already mentioned, from wealthy people. Plus, the family adds something as well. On a birthday, instead of giving some silly doll, put $20 in there. This money can be used at 18 to buy a first home, to start a business. It doesn't have to be at 18, it can be at 21 or even at 25. For what? For medical expenses, for education. The main idea is for education. Receiving $1,000 to start and an average of $100 per month. A child who is, let's say, 8 years old now, until they turn 18. He's saved up $20,000, guys. That's an amount he wouldn't have had otherwise. If he's from a poor family and wants to start a business, or if he's going to college, let's say he did well. He studied, got good grades. College grants him a scholarship and free education, but he still needs food. So he gets his $20,000 to survive for the first 2 years to study, while he's receiving the scholarship, and he can study. Opening the account on the child's birthday ensures money is in it by age 18. It's calculated to be $46,500. Gentlemen, this is a huge help for those whose parents can't help them, whose parents can't help them. We were always told parents help with this, but parents also had to learn, work, earn, and come up with ideas. That's not the point, though. The parents missed out. The child is responsible. Now we're helping the children whose parents missed out. Do you want to have some fun? There are also just some fun facts. Under Biden, in Democratic states, truck driving licenses were given to people who didn't know the rules, couldn't read English, and didn't understand road signs in the United States. Maybe they understood road signs in Mexico and El Salvador, but not here. Because of this, serious accidents often happen, sometimes with fatal outcomes. Not for the one sitting in the truck, but for American citizens. Really, it's funny, you just have to laugh. The Trump administration required the states to give such people a language test and took them off the road. Listen. 9,500 of these kinds of illiterate drivers who don't understand the rules of driving vehicles came here. Not 34, not 120, but 9,500. Do you understand that we were simply being killed? They were let out onto our streets and released from their states, driving all over America just to kill. In California, the department refused the test, but no one was surprised. That's right. And drivers from California continue to kill pedestrians and other drivers all over America. Also hysterical, funny, just hysterical. The border is locked. The border is locked. No illegals or drugs have crossed in the last few months. Amdon is not Malir. Amdon is miserable, not Malir. The border is locked. Known members of terrorist organizations and groups who are simply listed in the databases of Interpol, the CIA, and others have also crossed the border. Amal Metzga is ridiculous, and they were rightfully released by White House order. Now I'll give you a number that I specifically wrote down: 405,786 criminals. If you want, I'll repeat it. 405,786 criminals. Not because I memorized it, but because it's written right here. I wrote down those who had them at home before we got convictions, which could easily be found out by contacting them or asking them to provide a certificate, including convictions, for, repeated murders. This is not a person who accidentally dropped something and someone died. It's a repeated murder. Among them are many members of Mara Salvatrucha 13, a wonderful organization and prison gang, whatever it's called. Trends of Aragua, many Marseille and Salvadoran gangsters, and also many gangsters from Africa, and about 300,000 of them who didn't get caught. Out of those 400,000 plus have already been caught and deported, or are sitting here waiting for deportation. Some killed Americans while already on United States soil. At some point, the Democratic Party actually decided that the deaths of Americans are not as important as increasing the population of certain districts. The districts where the Democratic Party seeks more congressional seats have populations making those seats seem more important than our lives, which I understand. Again, I feel like laughing with joy. Now our feeding troughs are more important than your lives. That's what the Democratic Party said. And having said it, they did it. And again, it just became funny. You can't help but laugh. But there is something good, too. In November, Kazakhstan joined the Abraham Accords. That's a good thing. By becoming a business partner of Israel, the United States signed regional trade agreements. With whom? With Argentina, Ecuador, San Salvador, which is becoming a respectable state, and Guatemala. Also, preliminary agreements have been signed with Syria, finally moving it out of the Russian sphere of influence. By the way, this is actually a very nice thing. It came out of the Kremlin's hands, so to speak. Oil and power. Well, I mean, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, and the Emirates have committed to investing trillions of dollars into the United States economy, supposedly developing the market. We are actually becoming the place where, unlike during Biden's time, the global market and global technologies are developing most powerfully. Employment among our workers is increasing, which is very important. Not just workers, but highly qualified people in general. Salaries are rising in the United States. They have started to rise. And for us, this has always been the case. However, AI-related developments are now rapidly increasing. Well, artificial intelligence. All of this will spread around the world, of course, just like our internet did, just like our computers did, like everything else. Robotics, so-called databases, and other modern technologies. And we are, as they say, ahead of the whole world, and I would even say we are leaps and bounds ahead. The White House has banned gender reassignment surgeries for children, removed men from women's sports, and fired tens of thousands of officials. So this is what you'd call hallelujah. He helped the private sector create hundreds of thousands of manufacturing jobs, not in bureaucracy, but specifically in manufacturing. That's not a joke. That's great. The Trump administration imposed tariffs, and experts almost unanimously predicted high inflation. But instead, for some reason, inflation didn't agree with the experts and started to fall. Gas prices went down, real wages started to rise, taxes on the middle class were lowered, and the country began, in a way, moving toward a tax-free society, which is absolutely wonderful. Here's what things were like until 1912. Everything changed in 1913. The necessary funds were collected from customs duties. There were two other sources, but this was the main one. An average family, an average one, starts receiving $2,000 more per year, starting from January 1 of this year. Meanwhile, inflation is dropping, so it's not only more but also rises slightly from inflation. Trump's White House declared war on racism and anti-Semitism in workplaces, universities, schools, wherever it occurred. Prescription medications. Prescription drugs, I guess that's how I should put it. They were sold in the United States at prices 3 to 10 times higher than abroad. These very same drugs from these same American companies. Trump insisted on passing a law that the cost of medicine in the United States should not be higher than the lowest price in Europe and Asia. Well, it's not like it's free there, so to speak. No, if you sell it somewhere there, in Denmark, in Israel, somewhere there, yes, in France, for $10. Why do they sell it to us for $200 but for $10 elsewhere? That's nonsense. They should charge $200 everywhere or $30 everywhere. That's how it should be. So again, from January 1st, we all will start to feel it already. So they announced that they are lowering the prices of medicines produced here by American companies, and the prices will be reduced by about 3 times. This is a huge saving for Americans, a tremendous saving for Americans, especially for those who have some chronic illnesses, unlike me. I don't have a chronic illness. Yes, but I need medication for my arrhythmia, possibly atrial fibrillation to keep my heart working, and it costs me a bit. Every time I get a 3-month supply to make it cheaper, otherwise it's $300 a month. But if I get 3 months in advance, it's $800. Now it will cost $150, which saves me a lot, and I'm really happy about it. Yesterday's friends are now enemies. Under Trump, there are massive changes happening in the military. We're strengthening the military so there won't be a war. We're strengthening the military, spending more money so there won't be a war. So when people are afraid of you, well, what does it mean to be afraid? They're afraid to mess with you. They don't want to get involved with you. And that's the guarantee of peace. China is the exclusive supplier of, well, some of the ingredients necessary for the military. Trump found a few more deposits and is looking for ways to switch from Chinese sources to either diversified ones or domestic ones or partially domestic ones, partly from friends and certainly not from possible enemies. Trump took on the fight against the opioid crisis, which, by the way, his efforts have already led to a 24% decrease in overdose deaths. You may say this isn't victory. No, it's not victory yet. In general, it's impossible to achieve a complete victory, but it means that at least some people, mostly young guys, can be saved. The parents of those who are saved won't know that their children were saved. They don't know that in any case, if only, but really they should pray. Of course, this also applies to Trump, as there are reasons to pray for him too. Because as long as there is someone who wants to buy and someone who wants to sell, they will find each other. So let me remind you that in the last third of this report, we will talk about Minnesota and about Buttigieg's predictions. Well, both Nostradamus's and mine. Nostradamus and I decided to have a little debate and we'll give precise predictions. Well, with an accuracy of about 50%, it might happen or it might not. So there's a 50% chance it will happen and a 50% chance it won't. And what else hasn't worked out yet? I would really like to say that the prisons are full of deep state agents. But not yet. So what hasn't happened for us yet? To convict and imprison for many years or for a very long time? Well, whom? Barack, Michelle, Bill, Hillary, the leadership of the State Department from Biden's times, the leadership of the Justice Department under Biden and Obama, vaccine manufacturers, lockdown organizations. These are simply absolutely necessary. Dr. Fauci. For, if possible, 2 terms, 2, as they say, life sentences, yes, 2 life sentences. All those responsible for border security, including Mayorkas and Kamala, she can be put in jail with all her friends and acquaintances so she won't be bored. So, all the members of Congress who made tens and hundreds of millions of dollars on the stock market by deceiving us, Well, for example, Nancy Pelosi is a good example, 37 years in Congress. During this time, just receiving her salary and not investing anywhere except the stock market, she made $130 million. So, again, they've already calculated that her investments had a return of 16,930%. Debbie Wasserman Schultz, she's a former, expelled for fraud, theft, and other things, yes, accepted by the Democrats, former chair of the Democratic Party of America, achieved 142% stock growth per year, while the best firms in the world reached 20% per year, and they're happy with that. Slightly behind her was a member of her own party, Ron Wyden, with 123.8% return on investment. Let me remind you again, what does it mean after COVID? If someone was getting 6, maybe 5%, even in 2024, 202.5, that was considered a very good result among professionals. Ron and Debbie made 123% and 142%. They're just geniuses, that's all. So the best hedge funds in the world make, 15, maybe 25% annual returns, and they're very risky. Listen, the more risk you take, the more you can earn, the more you invest, because they tell you, we'll give you a lot. We have so many risks that if you invest, we'll give you a lot. Yes, so even this result, like 20%, can lead to a collapse, or, if it's not done very cleanly, Jews say kosher, not very kosher, it can absolutely lead to prison, and deservedly so. Simple as that. But here it's 123, 142%, and no one is in jail. And they're still talking about something, about Trump or something else. The war in Ukraine hasn't stopped. The war between Israel and Iran hasn't stopped. Although there is serious progress, China still has us by the intimate parts, supplying us with rare earths, antibiotics, and other essential products. The income level has risen a bit, but it's still not noticeable for workers and employees, meaning for the general population. Drugs still come from Mexico to the United States, though perhaps less directly and openly than before. And in large cities, the Democrats organize crimes against citizens and resistance to the actions of the federal police. The press is still left-leaning and still serves as a mouthpiece for globalism, collectivism, and, of course, the Democratic Party. So not everything is calm in the Danish kingdom yet, especially in Greenland. And what will happen? 2 provinces of Canada want to join the United States of America, which means that the indigenous people of Greenland dream of receiving the $100,000 offered by Trump because they don't care, and by that I mean the local residents. Well, about 85–90% of the population are natives, and they don't care whether it's the Danish or American flag flying on the main mast in the capital. The European Union realized it couldn't defend itself against Russia. Instead of starting to train their soldiers, they went to China and other countries, trying to persuade them to protect them from the terrible enemy. The United States of America and the European Union is becoming more and more diverging ideologically. I think the moment will come when our union, the alliance as we call it, will fall apart, or either it will fall apart or become a caliphate. The European Union will join the caliphate Great Britain once was. Yes, Canadian socialists are much more afraid of America than of the communists in China. They actually have a lot in common with the Chinese communists, much more than with those damned imperialists from America. The world is splitting into spheres of influence. America is taking, it seems, Grandia and Canada for itself, whether Canada wants it or not, no matter how many Chinese they bring in. Alaska, the continental United States, and down to the Panama Canal, including the Caribbean lake. Russia. I think China dominates the post-Soviet space. In part of Asia, Japan, and the independent Asian tigers are closing their borders. Europe will either submit to someone like Russia or China, Or maybe call on Turkey to protect them and become part of the new Ottoman Empire. Israel, the Sunnis, and hopefully a liberated free Iran will form an alliance of the children of Abraham. Well, I think they will. Although, of course, Persians are not children of Abraham, but they will pretend to be. They will gladly play any role as long as it gets them rid of those lunatics in turbans. And of course, this part of the world will extend its influence, so to speak, to protect the countries of the Middle East. I think up to Cyprus. Italy and Greece might join them, and not Turkey, which Germany will try to join. There are also all the other countries between India, China, Pakistan, Australia, and other players who are far from us. Something is happening, and one or two protectorates may be formed there. I think it will be called a protectorate. Yes, the biggest problem there is the covert struggle between China and India. China is more organized, while India is more creative. China will definitely want Siberia, and maybe even all of Russia. However, I think the United States will try to stop them from taking Siberia. So, to take Siberia, to take it, yes, but who will let them? It seems the world is expecting serious changes in the United States. The main problems will be internal, in the struggle with public, let's say, education. Maybe the state, so-called public schools, will fiercely resist, well, municipal and similar ones, will fiercely resist independent education, private independent education, which says, leave us alone, kids want to come to us, teachers want to teach them, leave us alone and don't tell us what we should teach them. We teach the right things, so don't call us less intelligent. In healthcare, of course, there's a struggle with the Obamacare monster, which gives enormous profits to insurance giants, and again, so to speak, against a fully private medical business with the right of the individual to insure their health the way they want, just like they insure their car or house. Another battle is the cost of medicine. Trump has already won by breaking the biggest player. That means Pfizer, and then all the others followed. In my view, nearly all of the other 12, so 13 total, are major international companies that accepted the United States terms. It looks like this is going to happen in our country in the next 3 to 5 years. Well, go to the Camerton channel, where there's my series called Answer to Nostradamus, where in 2022, that is 3 years ago, I discuss world events or their probability for, well, I took such a number, 17 years ahead. Why 17? Well, you'll find out in the very first video. The link will be below. Yes, absolutely accurate, undeniable predictions about the fate of the world, Russia, China, America, and whoever else is there. Wait, is Ukraine still there? Well, everyone except Israel, and I just don't make predictions about Israel because Israel's fate is unpredictable and, as they say, in God's hands. You could say everything is in God's hands, or that all destinies are in God's hands. But with others, you can calculate, you can find some kind of logic. But with Israel, the Judeans, they are Jews, they are Hebrews, they are Israelites. What happens with them? Well, with us, I have to admit it doesn't follow any logic because every time it seems like that's it. And suddenly something pops up that the Romans called Deus ex machina. I have an absolutely pure Roman pronunciation. That is, something completely unexpected appears, and it happens every single time, every single time. Russians have a saying, something like, unless something interferes. They call it God from the machine, like a little devil out of the box, but Americans call it Jack in the Box. Anyway, the link is below. It will be very interesting. I think it will be very interesting. Report from Minnesota. Meet the brilliant journalist, author of many books, and winner of the Reporter of the Year award, Liz Collins. She is working now. She was at the center of all events in Minneapolis, Minnesota during the riots and before. It's incredibly interesting.
She's lived in Minnesota over 20 years. He was born and raised here, climbing the corporate media ladder and moving all over the country before settling back in Minnesota, where he now works in independent media. But as for the topic of fraud itself, it really made the news about 10 years ago, and that was it. Now, it will seem very familiar to people. Back then, fake daycares and large amounts of money were leaving Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport. He calls it Minneapolis-St. Paul International and tracked this with authorities. But mysteriously, these investigations just seem to disappear. They were talked about in the news for a couple of years. There were even legislative hearings, and some members of Congress also raised this issue in Washington, but it never really developed further, and then it resurfaced again. During the COVID years, we witnessed what is considered the largest COVID-related fraud committed here in Minnesota. This is what became known as the fraud. Feeding our future, these were fake centers fraudulently claiming to feed hungry children. This exposed widespread Somali fraud with 78 people already charged. I don't even think the investigation is over yet. This is fraud totaling more than $250 million, and that's just this case alone. So these were some of the things that came up in the news from time to time. This is the endovirus video. Nika Shirley, I think, caught the country off guard, but we actually have a whole section on our website, alphanews.org. This is a scam page dedicated to all our stories from the past 10 years. And I'll say, I think there are 300 or 400 different stories, videos, just various cases that have happened. But I think it's finally getting the attention it honestly deserved for a very long time in order to stop it. That will be the key. Everyone kind of knew it was happening. I myself, as a reporter, have done such investigations, gone to these places. You know, you see a luxury car in the parking lot. There are no children or adults in their respective centers. Unfortunately, this has become a common sight in many areas of Minnesota, but unfortunately, in many areas of Minnesota,
For 10 years, people have written about this, published articles, and appealed to the state leadership in the city of Minneapolis. And silence, well, what kind of silence is that? Someone is standing there with scythes, little reapers with scythes are standing there, because that's what's interesting.
That's why I had Speaker of the House, Liza Demiot, on my show, and I asked her the same thing. She said, listen, we've been fighting this for many, many years, but it was such that the mainstream media or national news, would only touch on this topic a little bit, but it never got the kind of energy that was needed. And I asked her, what do you think the difference is? And she mentioned Nick Shirley, but I had just a couple of thoughts. This story with Nick Shirley was very loud. The fact that Tim Walz was running for vice president, I think, brought him onto the national stage. And then when people like Elon Musk and a whole bunch of that podcaster ecosystem kept bringing up this story over and over again, no one could turn away from it. And I think that's exactly the kind of coverage he needed. I know Alpha News, you've been working on this for a very long time. Can we say that this story suddenly got publicity and now it can't be forgotten? No response from...
Yes, I think so. I mean, we covered it. There were quite a few events related to feeding our future. Our reporters were in court covering it. Interestingly, we often use this in independent media because Minnesota's media structure is very submissive and cowardly. I'll be honest, and I was part of that for about 15 years working at the Columbia Broadcasting System affiliate. But you have a very left-leaning media base here, and they're just not really going to look where they should be looking.
Now we've gotten to what I wanted to say. A crime is being committed, where left-wing politicians are committing a robbery. Our money, yours and mine, was simply stolen. Yes, it was taken from us taxpayers, from you and me. Once again, someone goes to the bosses and says something, but the bosses themselves are either involved or their protagonist is involved. And at best, they quietly shove you into a corner and silence you. At best, that's what happens next. A local journalist writes or talks about it, but all the media are on handouts from the same politicians and their sponsors, Banduke, and they quickly shut you down. So in the best case, no one picks it up again and your news gets lost. It dies. There was no echo. Maybe the victim goes to court, but the prosecutor, whose wife, daughter, or even donor is involved, and whose boss is implicated, doesn't take the case to court. But if some desperate person does take the case to court, then the judge quickly explains that his children will never get a good job in any company and the case gets thrown out of court. It's a circular defense of stolen goods, a quiet, gentle system of mutual cover-up. And if you run into someone very nervous, like Hillary Clinton, for example, you'll end up committing suicide by shooting yourself in the back of the head twice. Or you'll jump headfirst from the 14th floor onto the pavement, for some reason leaving a suicide note written in someone else's handwriting. But in Minnesota, well, if people died, it was absolutely not like that. What are you talking about, car accidents or disasters? Gentlemen, on this upbeat and optimistic note, we'll stop here and take a break until tomorrow. I'm sure tomorrow there will be more wonderful news and the desire to discuss them. Oh, for example, information is starting to come in about Mike Lee Coyne, Trump's former lawyer, who is now saying that he was forced to lie about Trump in court. He was forced to lie. That's what he's saying now.